So the majority of the Old Testament is about the Exodus from Egypt and the subsequent journey of the Israelites to the Promised Land. During the time of the Exodus and their time in the desert, God gives Moses some really specific guidance on how they are supposed to worship God, what they are supposed to do when they enter these lands that are promised to them. And some of these things include tearing down the altars and the Asherah poles that exist to other gods to ensure that we are serving no other gods. That's why it's one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, right? So they walk into these lands, and as they're taking over, they're supposed to be taking all of these things out. But God tells that to Moses. If you remember, the people who came out of Egypt with Moses didn't trust God to deliver the promised land to them. And because they didn't trust God, they wandered the desert for 40 years. Not a single man who was at fighting age during that time would see the promised land. That was the promise of God. It complicated things, though, because those men were the ones who heard directly to tear down the Asherah poles, to remove the altars to the other gods. And while all the children had been told that, they didn't experience the deliverance from Egypt. They just heard about it. It was this really cool, think of like your grandfather's tall tales about fishing, except these were true stories. And they had this innate belief that somehow it was exaggerated. If you go to a Hellenistic Jew today, they will tell you that God didn't part the Red Sea. He parted a sea of reeds, and that we misinterpreted. So the power of what God had done was lost over the years. And so also their obedience to God, that fear of God, not the, oh my gosh, I'm terrified he's going to destroy me, but the reverence that he was destroying enemies on their behalf. So they go into these lands and they don't cut down the Asherah poles, and they don't tear down the altars to Baal. And very soon, the children of Israel are worshiping the other gods. At some point, and I would have to go back in my Bible and look, this is just this thing that God and I have been having a conversation about. At some point, the children of Israel realize they're worshiping the wrong gods, and they want to worship the God that delivered them. The problem is they have this dual-mindedness now. They understand that the Asherah poles and the altars are sacred. And so rather than tear them down, they repurpose them. They now believe that these Asherah poles are to the God of heaven as opposed to the gods of this foreign land. And when I read it in the Old Testament, I thought, how crazy is it that they didn't realize they had these idols, these false gods with monuments everywhere, all over their society. And they thought they were worshiping God with them. Now, eventually God comes back and he solidifies to the children of Israel, no, you cannot keep your Asherah poles and your altars to Baal. And in a resurgence, the Israelite children tear them down and they start worshiping the God of heaven again. This is not the end of the story. They continue to make mistakes. But at some point, they come to the knowledge that the Asherah poles and the altars to Baal have to go. So I'm sitting here and I'm having this conversation with God, and he says to me, the Christmas tree is an Asherah pole. You think you're honoring me. You're pointing out my birth. But it's a monument to a false god. You guys, this messed me up. You probably don't realize this. I am a Christmas fanatic. I'm the person who puts up the Christmas tree November 1st. That's me. There's decoration all over my house. I'm looking around right now and remembering that every time I take down my Christmas decorations, I feel like my house is bare. And so I start talking myself out of it. And I'm like, yeah, that's not, no. The Christmas tree is not an Asherah pole. Cassie, your brain is running away from you again. And then I did the research. And the Christmas tree is modeled on the Asherah pole. And we're sitting around with these things in our houses, believing that we are honoring God. And the reason we believe that is because we are so far removed from the knowledge of the traditions of our faith, from the festivals that God set out. Yes, I understand. We were grafted in. We're not the Jewish people. I mean, some of us are. Some of us have a very small remnant of Ashkenazi Jew. But the festivals of God were to celebrate God. And we believe that Jesus is the Messiah that fulfilled the prophecies of that God. So how can we possibly think that we're not supposed to honor the same festivals, that the same rules about not having Asherah poles and altars to other gods doesn't apply to us? I don't know.